eyes wide open. We are heading deep into the Appalachian Mountains, one of the most active and haunted regions in the United States. The paranormal in Appalachia is far more real than most people realize. Don't forget to subscribe, and let's take a look.
Some urban legends are just stories, but what if there's some that are real? Some so disturbing, so unnatural that it leaves people shaken, confused, or even worse. I'm talking about black-eyed children. And if they come knocking, you need to know what to do before it's too late. It's always the same story. It's late at night when the world is quiet and you're alone. And you hear a knock at the door. But when you answer, there's children just standing there. They're always calm, quiet, dressed in older clothes, but something's off. Their eyes. Deep black. No whites. No pupil. Just dark voids. You'll feel it immediately. An overwhelming sense of unease. That something's just not right. They always say the same thing. Can we come in? We're lost. Or, can I use your phone? But whatever you do, never let them in. People that have encountered them describe it as the most intense fear that they've ever felt. It's not like a regular fear. It's deep. It's unsettling. There's been stories of people feeling like the air around them freezes, and that it's just so cold and dark that they're frozen and don't know what to do. Let's talk about some real-life accounts. In one account from Vermont, a woman heard knocking late one snowy night. She opened the door a crack and saw 2 children. A boy and a girl. They asked to come inside and wait for their parents, who would be there soon. But something was off. Their voices were flat, almost robotic, and when she looked them in the eyes, she saw it. Those pitch black eyes. Her instincts urged her to immediately shut the door, and so she did. The knocking continued for hours, but when she finally looked outside, the children had disappeared. No footprints in the snow, no nothing, as if they had never been there to begin with. Then there's a story of a man in West Virginia who lived in a cabin by himself. One night, there was a knock at the door. When he answered, he found a teenage boy barefoot in the snow. The boy said he was lost and asked if he could come inside. The man felt uneasy and refused, and the boy just stood there, looking back with his lifeless, black eyes. The man quickly shut the door and locked it. But the knocking didn't stop. He could hear footsteps outside around the entire cabin, and no matter where he was, if he looked out a window, he knew that the teenage boy was there watching. The next morning, the man got up and went outside to see if he could find the boy. And to his surprise, there were no footprints, no hand marks from knocking, on the door, on the windows, nothing, as if he'd never been there. These encounters happen all over the world. It's always the same thing. Children knocking, asking if they can come in, with their lifeless, void, black eyes. And everybody always has the same overwhelming sense of fear. That they're frozen, but that they're also drawn in. Some believe that they are paranormal. Others believe that there's something much, much worse. But the truth is, nobody really knows. And what's terrifying is nobody really knows what happens if you do let them in. Those that have, let's just say they're not quite the same after that. So the next time you hear a knock late at night, ask yourself, what if it's them? What if it's the black-eyed children? And what if they don't ask to come in, but demand to be let in?
This happened when I lived in Georgia. It was late at night. I was up watching a movie when I heard somebody knocking on my door. For whatever reason, my gut instinct told me not to open it. 1, it's creepy for anyone to be coming to my door so late at night. But 2, I just had this gut-wrenching feeling that something was off. I ended up getting up from the couch and I got near the door trying to figure out who was out there. And before I could even open my mouth, the person standing behind the door knew I was standing there and said, "Hi, ma'am, I'm just here selling some magazine subscriptions. Can you please let me in?" I was a bit startled at first because how would he even know that I was standing there? I was definitely quiet. So I kind of peeked through the peephole and I saw that it was like a boy about to be maybe 12, 13 years old. He was wearing a hoodie. He was just kind of standing there. I decided to ignore him. He continued to knock on my door and start saying, "Please, ma'am, if you would just let me borrow a corner of your table so we can talk about these magazine subscriptions." And I'm just like, no. And he's just knocking and knocking and knocking until he gives up. He turns around and he goes right across where my neighbor lives. I hear when he knocks on her door and she opens it. The minute she opens the door, I hear the boy say whatever it was he was going to say to her. And all I hear is her scream, say, "Honey," like calling to like her husband. And then she just slams the door shut. Right after that, it was complete silent. I didn't hear anything else. The next morning at like 7 a.m., my neighbor came knocking on my door. I looked out and I saw that it was her, so I opened it and she was freaked out. And she begins to ask me if a boy had been at my door the night before. So I explained to her and I said, "Yes, somebody knocked on my door and I saw when he knocked on your door." She then goes to tell me that when she opened the door and he started to talk to her, she saw that his eyes were completely blacked out. Like even the white parts were completely blacked out. And she got this gut-wrenching feeling that her first instinct was to yell for her husband, and she slammed the door shut. That was one of the first times that I had ever even heard about the black-eyed kids. And once I did more research, I found out what happens if you open the door. So black-eyed kids bring death. They bring chaos. They bring sickness. They bring loss of money, loss of income, loss of job. They just bring the worst of the worst. Thankfully, she did not allow him into the house, but she did answer the door. So unfortunately, it cost her marriage. Like her and her husband ended up breaking up. It was a horrible divorce. She lost everything. Like everything just horrible. So word of advice, if you ever hear a knock at the door, don't answer it.
So I've made a video about my experience with the black-eyed children in the past, but it was forever ago, back when Jesus was a boy, so I'll just tell you again. I was working in an apartment building, and I heard a knock on the office door. I was just watching YouTube videos on my phone. I was just watching Trisha Paytas. That's what I was watching. And I heard a knock on the office door, and my first thought was, like, why are you out here in this tropical disaster? My second thought was, read the sign, babe. Are we within office hours? Just come on in. Don't knock. So I looked out the window, because I was nosy. I want to see who I'm talking to before I have to talk to him, because I don't like to talk to anybody for real. It was two kids, and they were looking down, and I was like, like, what's going on? And so I go over there, and I open the door, and I'm like, "Hey, where are your parents?" Like, when they looked up at me, their eyes were all black, like black as this right here. And there was no surface to them. It was just two black holes that looked like they went on forever. When I made eye contact with them, or the lack thereof, the terror and the fear started right here and worked its way down my whole body. And I felt like something that was not supposed to be there was like running its hands down the back of my spine. I don't know how to explain that. Do with that what you will, but that's how I felt. And I'm very spiritual and I'm very well protected. So immediately I knew something was wrong, and I'm educated on what they are. So I fortunately knew exactly what I was dealing with when I was dealing with it. So I immediately closed the door. I closed the office. I called someone who I trust. I called my boss. I was like, "Hey, pull the cameras. Like, you need to come see this." Nothing ever came of it. I never got sick. Nothing terrible ever happened to me. Like I said, I'm very spiritual and very well protected. This stuff is real. And y'all, just because you don't understand it, don't mean it don't exist. I'm telling you right now, you need to respect the fact that this might exist. Because it does. Don't tamper with it. Don't go looking for it. But if you're faced with it, know what to do. But that's my story. It was wild. I hope I never have that experience again. It was not very fun. I did not enjoy it at all. It's a story I'll always have to tell. And you can believe me or not. I don't really care. I know what I saw.
Okay, so this, I swear, is true. It actually just happened 2 days ago. A friend of mine, one of my dear, dear friends, messaged me. It was like 10:45 at night. He was super freaked out. He had been drifting off to sleep, and there was a knock on his door, which was very strange to him because he has a doorbell. So he ignored it. And then he heard another knock, and he looked at the cameras that were on the front door and nobody was there. So he ignored it again. And then someone knocked again. So he went and answered the door, which I would have never done. And there were 2 children standing out there, and they never looked up, but they asked him to come in. They said that they were extremely cold, and they said, "We must come in." And he was really disturbed by what they had on. They had on these odd outfits, like oversized hoodies and weird shoes. And they had these strange robotic voices, and he was just really disturbed. So he didn't let them in, and said, "I'm going to call the cops so your parents can come pick you up." And they kept on saying, "You have to let us in. You have to let us in." So he said, "I'm going to call the cops." He closed the door, and he looks at the footage. And during that whole time, there was nobody out there. So he was really convinced that he was losing his mind, and super freaked out, rightfully so. So I Googled some stuff, and the black-eyed children came up immediately. I vaguely remember hearing about them, but of course they're an urban legend, so I didn't pay attention. Why would I? And they didn't ever look up at him, so he doesn't know if they had black eyes. But I sent him the stuff. I was like, "Is this what you experienced?" And he was so shaken up. He was like, down to even what they said, "This is exactly what I experienced." And I know it sounds like a lie because it's a urban legend, but it really happened. It didn't happen to a friend of a friend's sister's cousin. It happened to my really dear friend. And I was speaking to him right afterwards. I mean, he's still really, really shaken up. So for whatever it's worth, I do think these things are real. And supposedly they are very, very, they're malicious. They're not benevolent. So if you encounter anything like this, supposedly they'll come up to doors, they'll come up to people at gas stations, they'll knock on the window of your car. I guess if you encounter these things, don't interact with them, and certainly don't let them in. But I promise this is true. It really actually happened to my friend. So be safe.
So let me tell you about the time that I'm pretty sure I came in contact with a black-eyed child. If you don't know what that is, it's a paranormal phenomenon where it will appear as a child. However, they have solid black eyes, not just the iris, but the entire eye. And they're typically seen in the woods, on people's doorsteps. They panhandle. They kind of just do random shit. But it's a kid. I was 19 at the time. Both me and my ex-husband were on night shift, but he worked that night and I didn't. So I was home alone by myself, and I hated being home alone. I lived up in a holler in Kentucky, and I had 3 neighbors, but 2 of them were also night shift, so they were never home. And the area where I lived was extremely dark. There was one street light, but it wasn't even at my house. So my front yard and backyard, pretty much pitch black if I didn't have my porch lights on. So I'm sitting there, it's 3 a.m. and I hear a knock on my front door, and we didn't even use my front door for anything, but it was one of those. I lived in a trailer, and it was one of the doors that was solid metal or whatever, but it had the small little window cut out. It wasn't a very big window. It was maybe 3 inches wide, and it was just long, right? So I go to my front door, and I'm looking, and I don't see nobody. And as I'm getting ready to walk away from my door, I hear hello, and I was and I look out the window and down. I had to press my face against my window, and I looked down, and there appeared to be a kid. Looked like a little girl, had a pink and purple hoodie on, and immediately I call my ex-husband. I'm like, "Hey, somebody's knocking on the door, and it looks like a kid, but I'm not sure because I can't even really see." And he's like, "Okay, go ahead and call the cops." As we're on the phone, you can hear somebody start pounding on the outside of my house. He's like, "Oh my God, yeah, call the cops." And I'm like, "Okay." So I get off the phone, call the cops, and I start videoing. And as I'm videoing, you can see what looks like flashlights looking into my bedroom windows, which was on the other side of the trailer. In our mind, he's like, that probably wasn't a kid. It was probably somebody sitting on their knees with a kid's hoodie on trying to get you to answer the door so they could rob us. And I was like, see, that makes sense. But when the cops came out, they showed up, and it was about 15 minutes later they showed up. Cops in Kentucky are slow. But they showed up, and they looked around the house, and it had been raining the night prior. There was no footprints outside of my house. Because we were working on the theory that this was probably more than one person. They were disguising themselves as a kid. I was going to answer the door. They were going to like ambush me and rob the house, which there was nothing in the house anyway. We were okay, like money wise, but we didn't have money. So I had like 2 TVs in the house. Nothing like significant. So then my ex-husband shows up, and the cops are like, there was nobody here. And he's like, no, there was. He was like, I could hear them beating on the walls. She sent me the video of, like, she's sitting on the couch clear on the other side of the house, and there's flashlights in the windows. He was like, I seen this myself. There was somebody here. And the police were like, there's no footprints, and I didn't see anybody when I got here, so I'm not entirely sure what to tell you. And that, like, it's still in my mind. I'm like, it doesn't make sense. Because if it was a black-eyed child, I don't think they'd be shining flashlights in my house. But if it was an actual person, I don't think that there would not be any footprints. And the front of my house, like where the actual person was, going up onto my front porch, stayed so muddy and nasty because there was a natural spring under the front of my house. We couldn't even use the front yard because if you stepped off of the porch, you immediately sunk up in mud. It was so bad that it rotted my front porch twice since I lived there. And I only lived there for like 4 years. I still don't know exactly what happened. My best guess is because there was no footprints and I'm a logical person, it had to be something else. But I really still to this day don't know.
This first story takes place in Glade Spring, West Virginia, back in 2014. So I'd never heard of the black-eyed children until I encountered them. Still not knowing what in the world or anything they were, I did what any modern 25-year-old male would do. I Googled them. And boy, was I shocked. I wasn't the only one. I had not seen them for myself. I would have just thought it to be another modern urban legend gone viral. Besides my girlfriend, I've only told my brother, who's into everything creepy and horror, for I knew he would be the only one not to judge me or try to commit me to a mental hospital. He's the one who said I should post it here. If this is the wrong sub, then please direct me to the right one. And keep in mind, I'm no writer. I'm sorry for any grammar. I'm an accountant. I don't want any upvotes or try to impress anybody. I'm just simply trying to warn people that some things out in this world are beyond our comprehension. And if you hear a knock at the door, make sure you check before opening it. I wish I had, and here's my story. My girlfriend and I live in a small gated community in southern West Virginia called Glade Springs. The community has about 150 houses, a country club, and a steakhouse bar called Bunkers. Now, anyone can come through the gate during the business hours and of Bunkers, but after they close, the front security gate stops all traffic and makes sure that you're a resident. If you're a visitor, they call the house that you're going to verify that you're actually expecting them. Sometimes it can be a hassle, but hey, I don't have to worry about a robbery. So imagine my surprise when my doorbell chimed at 3 a.m. I was jarred awake and wasn't sure if it was just a dream, considering I had just went to bed shortly before and was probably going into REM sleep. I rolled over and looked at the clock, noticing the time. When my doorbell chimed again, I felt a cold chill run through my body. Not reading too much into it. Could be one of the neighbors. They have as an emergency or anything, I nonchalantly made my way to the door. Now see how foolish I really was. And opened it. Luckily, The wrought iron storm door was still locked because who or what stood before me was not a resident of the community. 2 young boys stood at my doorstep, one looking at about 17, another about 10, wearing a dark hooded sweatshirt and jeans. The young one had on shaggy, dirty blonde hair and would only look down at the stone steps. And the other one had his hood pulled and his head tipped to where I could only see half from his nose down. My voice caught in my throat, and before I could even ask what they wanted, the older one spoke. His voice sounded forced and dry. There was no emotion, no sincerity of what he said. I'm sorry to bother you and your girlfriend, but we need to come in to use your phone. We've been in an accident. I felt the familiar chill return to my whole body. How did he know my girlfriend was here? I wrote it off as my Tahoe and her Volkswagen was in the driveway, and I figured they just assumed. I tripped over my words. Something about these kids just weren't right, weren't normal, and wasn't human. I can bring you my cell phone, and you can call. I don't get service inside here, so you'll have to stand out on the sidewalk to call, I finally said nervously. Of course, I was lying through my clenched teeth. I did not want these kids in my house. Well, my brother really needs to use your bathroom, Kane. We have to come in, the older one said. And that's when I went into complete panic. He knew my name. I'm sorry, are you from here? How did you know my name? The words practically shook out of my mouth. That's when he became slightly hostile and demanded to be led inside. I told him I was sorry, but I couldn't help him. And just as I was about to close the main door is when it happened. The both of them snapped their heads upwards and looked at me straight in the eyes. Black. No iris, no pupil, no retina. Just pure, deep black. I was paralyzed with fear. For a second, I thought those kids were just playing a really cruel joke, and it snuck in the community somehow and had brought some of those freaky supernatural demon contact lenses. That wasn't until I heard ringing. It was like a ringing sound that you hear when you have a hearing test done, that digital high-pitched shrill ringing. And then the flashback started. I was suddenly a toddler again at my grandparents' house, sitting under a chestnut tree, with my mother picking up the nuts and putting them in a large metal soup kettle. It was a crisp fall day. It's one of my earliest and dearest memories. I was about 3, and even have a picture, and one I hold very dear to my heart. But then they were there, behind my mother. We locked eyes, their eyes still black as night, and suddenly they smiled simultaneously. That's when everything went black. The next thing I knew, I was shaken awake, lying in the mudroom floor. My girlfriend standing over me with a worried look. What the heck, Kane? She asked. I had no idea how to answer her. My head had taken a good whack against the slate floor, and a bit of dry blood was stuck to my hair. But other than that, I was fine physically. I slowly remembered everything, and what happened, and looked at the door. daylight. I'd never been so glad to see morning in all my life. I told my girlfriend everything that happened, and I honestly think she thought I had brain damage from hitting the floor. But she insisted she believed me. And then we Googled it, and I believe that's when she really started to believe me. It was right then. I don't know who or what they were, or where they come from, but they're not of this world. I know that for a fact. For some reason, I had a lingering thought. Still not sure if they put a thought in my head or not, that they wanted me to know that even my memories aren't safe.
This is a spooky family, terrifying experience that is stretched between a week's time. There's a lot of stuff that happens in this week. And I'm going to give you the backstory that leads up to this week of chaos. In 2009, my niece and my brother-in-law passed away in a car wreck. My sister-in-law survived. Okay, that's the lead up. After the funeral, the day after the funeral, we had a bunch of flowers show up to her house because, she was dealing with a lot with her loss. So she sent all the flowers to our house. And we had plenty of people coming in and coming by and visiting, giving their condolences, and we were giving flowers away. So there was constantly people in and out of the house. Okay. This is the day after the funeral. The first incident is they apparently come to visit my son because he gave us details about what they were wearing and where their wounds were. And the only people that knew that was my sister-in-law, the nurse that happened to be where she was at the time that helped her, the state troopers, and the EMS. They were the only people that knew these details, but my son knew them. So, and we confirmed it with my sister-in-law. She said, yes, that was all correct. I don't remember how she handled it. Okay, there's one. Two, the next night, my son said, Mom, take my hand. We're going on a walk. I said, who are we going on a walk with? He said her name. He said, she's wanting to show me something. So we go into our kitchen. He looks up at the fire alarm. And I said, what is it? He goes, she's touching the fire alarm. There's blood on the fire alarm. So I told my husband, I said, you need to check the fire alarm. I said, he sees her. And he says she's touching the fire alarm. So sure enough, the batteries are dead in that fire alarm. He changes them immediately. Okay. And then, we walk into the kitchen. We're standing there for a minute and he's just like, starts waving. And I said, what are you waving at? He goes, oh, she's done. She's gone. I was like, okay. And then he goes back to his room and goes playing. No big deal. Okay. All right. That night, remember, that night after the batteries getting changed, we all got woke up at 2:00 in the morning from our fire alarm going off. We hop up out of bed and we smell smoke. We cannot see smoke, but we smell smoke. We go to the back of the house where our laundry room is, open the door. It's filled with smoke because our hot water heater is shorted out and is starting to catch on fire. So we have to call the fire department and they handle it. If my niece wouldn't have come to my son, there's no telling where we would, actually I know where we'd be. We probably would have burned up if it wasn't for her coming to him. Okay, so there's two. Here's the third one. This is where it starts getting right flat terrifying and creepy. Okay, we're all in the house and we're sitting there, and all day long my son's just been talking about these things called woozles. We didn't think nothing about it. We thought it was some childhood made up thing. He's 4. He was like, woozles, okay, maybe it's some, little TV creature he's seen, no big deal. Okay. And he's like, well, what's woozles? He goes, well, they're outside. And we're like, what are they? And he goes, they're white with black eyes. Okay. I'm like, all right, maybe he's watched a scary movie, and we was just like, okay, well, just don't go outside. Well, one of our family members was over and she's visiting and she's like, well, I got to go to work. And she got ready to leave. Well, my son goes and puts his back and his butt against the door and says, no, puts his hand and says, no, you can't go. And she goes, why? I got to go to work. He goes, you can't. The woozles are outside. They'll get you. And she's like, no, because there's nothing out there, baby. Trying to, talk to her down to, it's going to be okay. And he goes, no, you can't go. And he refused to let her leave. And she's like, is he being serious? And I'm like, he's been talking about woozles. I said, I'm not sure what it is. Well, after about 30 minutes, she had to go to work. So we kind of opened the door and we looked out and we walked her to her car and she went to work. Okay. All right. So that was that incident. I forgot what I'm up to. I think 4. The 5th one. This night, my son, I don't remember which incident happened first, this one or the last one I'm going to tell you. I'm not sure which one, so I'm just going to tell it to you. My mother-in-law got this urge to get up and go check on my son, so she hops up out of bed to go check on him. And when she walked in to look at him, she screamed. And she come running out with my son in her arms, and we said, what's wrong? What's wrong? She goes, I just went in there. She goes, I had an urge to go check on him. I went in there in his room and he had a black orb hovering over him. She said, don't let him go back in that room. I was like, a what? She said there was a black orb about yay big hovering over him, over his sleep while he was sound asleep. She said, I'm not crazy. I saw a black orb over and over him. So we took him out of the room. He did not sleep in that room that night. He slept in the living room. Okay. And that was all that happened to that incident. Now here's the last one. It was at night again. We went in to tell him, say, oh, y'all, time to go to bed, Kids are getting to bed, And he was just standing at the window, staring at the window. I said, what are you doing? He goes, the woozles. I said, where's the woozles? He goes, they're at the window. I said, well, what are they doing? He said, and he just turned around so casual and goes, they want me to go with them, Mom. I said, do what? I said, what do they look like? He goes, one's a boy, one's a girl. They're in all white with black eyes. He goes, they want me to go with them. I said, oh, no, you ain't. I said, get your butt in that bed. And I stared out the window and I didn't see nothing. He said, but they're nice. They want me, Mom. They like me. I said, son, go to bed right now. I said, just go to bed. Mom's going to handle it. So I raised the window and I yelled out the window. Yes, I yelled out the window. Go away. Leave my son alone. You cannot have him. I said, in the name of Jesus, be gone. Yes, I yelled this out my window in the neighborhood. As crazy as that sounds, I did yell that. But you want to know something? After that night, those woozles never returned. And I've done some research on the solid white with black eyes. They're called black-eyed children. They are demonic spirits. So if you have ever experienced them, call on the name of Jesus and make them go away. And if you don't believe in Jesus, then I don't know what to tell you, but you better find a way to keep them away from your loved ones because they're demonic spirits. They were after my son. They've been after my son. And he hasn't really had no dealings. See, from 4 to 20 now, he's not had no experiences with the supernatural. Only when we moved up here to the Appalachian Mountains did he start having experiences with the supernatural again. Now, that may not be the creepiest, spookiest story for some of y'all, but that is a real life experience that me and my family has dealt with, and it was right flat terrifying because it was about my 4-year-old son. He has seen his passed away niece, his cousin and uncle. She saved us from burning up in a house fire. He was trying to protect us from woozles, black-eyed children, and then we had to deal with black-eyed children trying to take him. So that's about as real and as terrifying as it gets.
So this is the second scariest thing that's ever happened to me while living in Appalachia. For a recap, I'm 21 years old. I've lived in Appalachia my whole life, specifically in the North Georgia mountains. And this story is my encounter with what I believe to be a black-eyed child. And if you don't know what a black-eyed child is, it's essentially like a demon that takes the form of a child with black eyes. It's scary. But I believe truly in my heart I encountered one this day. So, pretext. I was in middle school. The last story I told, the deer creature, was in high school. This is middle school. I was in middle school in the playing in my backyard. Again, live in the mountains. I was playing Star Wars with lightsabers. I think I was playing Force Unleashed, pretending I was Star Killer. I was running around the woods, my lightsaber hitting, and my dog was with me at the time. My dog's still alive. I would ask him his thoughts on the story, but, I don't think he would be much help. But I was running through the woods, and I was playing, all this. I kept noticing something in the corner of my eye. So this is a specific feeling. I don't know if much people remember, but when you're a kid, you can kind of tell when there's other kids around you because it's like a vibe, right? Like, that feeling you get on the playground, there's like a bunch of other kids there versus if you go to the playground like by yourself or fewer people there when you were a kid. It was that feeling. I had this feeling that there was another kid kind of there. It was just like this feeling that something was like watching me play and kind of wanted to join in. But it was also this dreadful feeling, this horrible, dreadful feeling. So I was running through the woods near my house and my dog started acting really strange as well. Like he started kind of I can't say the word, but like barking up and kind of like being, territorial. And I just assumed it was deers because, dogs are weird. They'll pick everything. So running through the woods, and then I see something. Okay, I will never forget this until I'm dead. So where I'm at in the woods, there's this steep hill and there's this little valley area and it's like, it goes down. So I'm playing and I noticed something just staring at me. Like I could feel it staring at me, and in my mind as a child, I knew something was staring at me. I looked up and there I saw it for a brief second. And in this moment, I remember fully because I could see every detail, every single gruesome detail on this thing. It was a child with grayish, whitish toned skin, unkempt black hair that looked like it was trying to be cut into a bowl cut. Its eyes were dark. That's the one thing that sticks out to me. Like, if you live in the South, you experience darkness, right? Because especially if you live in the southern states where you're far from cities and towns, the only light you have sometimes is the moon and the stars. But if it's cloudy, you got nothing. That was the best comparison I could say on the feeling I got from this and the thing's eyes. And when I saw it, it was like a brief that, but my eyes locked onto it. After my eyes locked onto it, I stared for what felt like maybe 2 seconds, but felt way longer. I blinked, and then the thing was gone. My dog started freaking out, dude. He started barking and snapping and wearing up on everything. And I turned and I ran as fast as my little legs could. I was probably like a good mile into the woods. And I ran home, and I can't remember if I went to my parents first or my sister first. But I ran home because they live right next to us, and I was sobbing my eyes out, dude. It was bad. I was tweaking out. And I've never seen that thing again, okay? But everywhere that woods was, I have explored thoroughly, then and now. There is no settlement set up. There's no signs of life other than animals in those parts of the woods. And I've never seen this thing since, but the vision of what it was has been burnt into my head ever since.
It is a topic I knew very little about. I knew some reports came from around the country, specifically some reports out of the Appalachians. But beyond that, I knew very little. And I immediately consulted with some people in the field of paranormal research, and across the board, the reaction seemed to be the same, that this was a sinister thing. That by its very nature it was sinister and dark, and that it was something not to be taken lightly. And so I began to research the topic. Quick research reveals that this phenomenon supposedly was first reported on a mass basis by a man named Brian Bethel in Appalachian, Texas in 1996. Just a cursory search of the internet and YouTube, I found an account from the late 1800s, an account from 1918 in Texas, an account from the mountains of Virginia in the 1950s, just to name a few. I believe that this phenomenon has existed at minimum in folklore for a very, very long time, and I feel like it probably originated from an isolated rural area such as the Appalachian Mountains or the Appalachian foothills, but I don't know. I do know that there's many reports that's come in from many different places. A lot of speculations on what this phenomenon means, what these entities are. Some say they're demons, some say aliens, some say they're disgruntled spirits taking the form of children to disarm their intended victims. Some associate them with cursed ground. Some associate them with unmarked graves. Some associate them with Native American burial grounds. There's no shortage of ideas on this phenomenon. The topic is the black-eyed children, and the encounter that I'm sharing with you was the encounter of Susan, and that's an assumed name, not her real name. And this encounter was shared with me after she passed away, and it was her best friend, and he described himself as her lifelong partner. And I asked him why, and he said he felt that it was time to share her story with the world. But she had developed the habit of traveling back and forth from Chapel Hill, North Carolina, to her childhood home, and that she had found a time of peace and tranquility in her life, and found comfort, and felt when she came to her childhood home on the weekends to visit, she found that she felt closer to her departed parents. She had developed the habit of sitting on the back porch, the black screened-in porch, on those late summer afternoons into the evening time, reading, sipping coffee, thinking, peering off into the distance at the silhouette of the mountains. And then there was the encounter, and her whole life changed. She had been sitting there reading with the reading lamp on. Sun had just began to set below the western horizon behind her, and she saw the shadows growing longer. She saw 4 silhouettes emerge from the woods downhill in her backyard, and it turned out to be 4 children. There was one spokesman in the group, spokesperson, appeared to be a 12, 13-year-old boy, and he called her by name and said, "Miss Susan, you must help us. Miss Susan, we need you." And she was stunned. How do these children know my name? Where are these children coming from? What's going on? But she just suddenly became overwhelmed by an unexplained fear as she was reaching for the very latch to open that door to greet these children that were coming to her out of the ever-darkening backyard of her childhood home. And she moved her hand down, and she doesn't know why she made any of the decisions she made that night, but she suddenly lowered her hand and she did not unlatch it. She finally said, "What can I do to help you?" And this boy, in an otherworldly voice that chilled her blood, said, "We need to come in. Will you allow us entry?" She found that to be odd words to be coming from a kid that was 12 or 13 years old. And she said, "Do you need me to call your parents? You need me to call the police?" And oddly enough, this male child said, "Susan, we do not need the sheriff. You are able to help us. Let us come in." And by then, these 4 children are at the very base of the back steps coming to that porch. And the first visual detail she noticed was the odd dress of the children. Dressed from an older time, and the one female child of the group wearing strange-looking, oversized, baggy overalls with a gray-colored shirt, but had floral designs on it. And it was when the children looked up at her to make eye contact that she saw the thing that haunted her till the very day she died. As they looked up, she said that all she saw was soulless black eyes, almost as if they didn't have any eyes at all, but but just black holes where their eyes should be. She said every fiber of her being said run. Every fiber of her being screamed danger. And in the conversation, she felt she would on and off again feel stunned, unable to move, not sure what to do. She finally summoned up the strength to say, "No, children, you stay there. I'm calling the sheriff." And all went quiet. The children just stared at her. And she was fixated on their eyes. And then the female of the group, the one with the oversized baggy overalls, hung her head downward as though she was going to look at the ground, but then seemed to have started sobbing, and her shoulders were heaving and her head was bouncing up and down a little bit. And she finally put her face in her hands. But just as Susan was about to be moved with pity and compassion, it became evident that this little girl was not sobbing, but rather she was laughing and giggling in such a way that Susan felt the hairs on the back of her neck standing up, and she just wanted to run away but couldn't. And then something happened that horrified Susan and stayed in her nightmares until the very day that she died. This female child stopped everything and suddenly looked back up at her. And her mouth was moving, but out of her mouth, Susan heard her deceased mother's voice saying, "Susan, let these children have shelter. Susan, do it. Susan, do it." It was another time Susan just felt like she was completely helpless. But somehow, she managed to scream, "Leave now. Leave now." And she was getting ready to turn away and walk back into the house. And the oldest boy said, "Your mother wouldn't help us either. But you do not know what she knew, Susan." And then these four entities, these four black-eyed children, turned in unison and began to walk away back toward the woods, into the darkness, and disappeared altogether. Susan, at that very moment, she didn't call the police. She didn't do anything. She gathered a few things, her overnight bag and her keys and her purse, and she left and drove non-stop back to Chapel Hill. She woke up her best friend, her lifelong partner, Dave, and shared with him what had happened. And then the next day, she talked more about it and described it more in detail. And Dave pitched the idea of speaking with Susan's mother's best friend, who we're going to call Gwen. And so that next weekend they drove back, but they did not stay in Susan's childhood home. They got a motel. And they met with Gwen and had coffee, and she described to Gwen what happened. Gwen didn't appear shocked. She didn't appear surprised. But she said, "Susan, after your father died, the very same thing happened to your mother. Same scenario. They appeared out of those woods. Your mother saw them coming through the backyard as she stood at the kitchen window doing her evening dishes. And she said, Susan, your mother didn't have very little conversation with him because she said that she felt immediately that she was dealing with demonic entities. She invoked the name of Jesus and ordered them to leave. And they did indeed leave. But Gwen said, I know a little bit about this, and I know they come at people when they're vulnerable, when they're grieving, when they're having tough times in their life. They came for your mother when your father died, and they came for you when your mother died. And Gwen said, we'll talk more about it later if you decide to move back here. Susan and Dave went back to Chapel Hill, and then the next weekend came back, and by then Susan had made her decision. They cleaned the house out, and the house sat empty for years. Dave said Susan was never the same after that. He tried to get her to go to counseling. He tried to go get her to go seek the help of a preacher, but she wouldn't do anything. After a few months, Susan simply refused to talk about it whatsoever in any way, shape, or form with Dave. or Gwen or anyone else. She passed away a few years later in her sleep at a young age, and Dave asked me not to share the circumstances of her passing, and I will certainly honor that. But Dave said that he felt, although he wasn't there, hearing her story and seeing the fear in her eyes, and hearing the anxiety in her voice and the panic in her voice as she told the story to him several times, that it tortured her and that it tortured him. So with that, I'll say I pray that none of you ever have to deal with anything like that whatsoever.
Nobody really has an answer of what they are. They will come to your door, they will come to your car, and they will knock. And they are not allowed to be let in unless you open the door and let them in. But they are known to kind of keep their head down and look at the ground and not really talk to you looking at your eyes until they look up. And then you can see just black. There's no white. It's just black, like dark, dark, dark. So you are not supposed to let these children in because weird things happen once they're let in. So there was this family, and it was the middle of like the snowstorm, and it was in the middle of the night, and the wife heard these really, really loud 3 knocks at her door. So she gets up and she sees these children out at the door. And so she runs back and gets her husband, and she's like, there's some kids out at the door. Maybe there's a wreck down the street. Like, I don't know. So she sits back, and her husband goes to the door, and he sees these 2 young children, and they're like, please let us in, we need to use your phone, let us in. And so the husband's like, okay, come on in, use the phone, whatever you need. As soon as they started walking in, they looked up, and their eyes were just black. And the wife was standing behind the husband at this time, and she's like trying to compose herself, but like freaking out because that's not normal. And these young children looked like they were just dressed really old, like they had a really rough haircut. The little boys was kind of like a bowl cut, and the girls was like really like rough and straggly, and their clothes looked really, really big on them. Almost like they just like took them out of someone's closet. So this lady is like, can we call your parents? Like, what do we need to do? And they're like, we can call our parents. And by then they're like, we need to use the restroom. So the wife like showed them the hallway where the restroom was, and she came back to her husband, and she was just like, this is so strange. Like, what is going on? And he's like, I don't know, but I have a really, really bad headache all of a sudden. And the wife's like, okay, so she's trying to tend to her husband, seeing what's going on and why all of a sudden he has a really bad headache. Then he started to get a really bad nosebleed. And she's like, my husband has never had a nosebleed. Like, the entire time we've ever been together, never has he had a nosebleed. Then the children come back walking through the hallway, and they say, our parents are here. And they walk out the door in the middle of the snow blizzard, and the lady looks out the window and is peeking, to see what the mom and dad look like. And it's 2 men standing there in big black suits, just staring at the house, like staring directly, almost like through her. So the whole situation was super, super strange. After that, the husband kept getting these chronic nosebleeds just all the time. His nose was bleeding. And so they're like, okay, let's go to the doctor. Let's get it checked out. All of a sudden, when they went to the doctor, they discovered that he had full-blown melanoma cancer. This is a husband who has never worked outside, doesn't go outside a lot, like to where he would get skin cancer like that, but he had full-blown melanoma. Then after the husband got this awful news, the wife started getting really, really bad nosebleeds. And they, of course, couldn't figure out what was going on with her either. And she said to her husband, I wish so badly we would not have let those kids in, because none of this stuff started happening until the night that those children came in. Shortly after that, the husband passed away. So if you get a random knock in the middle of the night or at your door and little kids are sitting there saying that they need in and they need to use your phone or use your restroom, do not let them in.
We've seen this recent uptick of black-eyed children sightings in the past couple of years. And even though this is supposed to be an urban legend, there have been thousands of reports of people having these encounters with these people who appear to have these very large black eyes. Now, this story takes place on the Appalachian Trail in New York. And there was this guy named Michael. Michael said that him and his friend were hiking a portion of the Appalachian Trail in New York. And he said they had hiked probably at this point 6 miles. And he said they started to go up this hill, and it was a pretty steep incline. And he said as they got halfway up to this top of this hill, he said they noticed these two people walking up ahead. He said they kind of were walking very funny, very erratically, almost robotic-like. He said eventually they made their way to these people. And he said he noticed there was a man, looked very young, probably 18, 19. And he said there was a girl behind him that seemed very young. And she said they both had on these white outfits, white shirts, white pants. The girl had on this white baseball cap. She had this brown, dark hair, you know, like this sort of pale white, long face. And he said, you know, as they walked past them, he began to get like a really bad vibe from them. He said the guy stopped right in front of him, and the girl, she kind of stopped behind him, like she was hiding. And he said this guy then spoke in this very robotic-like voice. You know, can you help us? We are lost. Can you show us the trail? And he's like, well, you know, if you just continue down this trail, it'll lead you right to the road. Like, it's not that hard. He said, no, can you come with us? And he's like, oh, I don't need to come with you. All you got to do, you know, you go down this trail about a mile and it'll take you right to the road. Like, you don't need me to show you where to go. And he said over and over again, this guy insisted with him, take us, show us, take us to the trail. And he told him, I don't know you guys, like, I'm not going with you. Like, we're hiking. We're going to continue to go this way. But if you go down that way, mile down, you'll find the road. So that's when the girl kind of peeked out a little bit. And as he looks at her, he notices she has these solid, large black eyes. They weren't human. And he said she kind of ducked back behind this guy. And once this guy noticed that Michael and his friend had seen the girl and noticed that she had these black eyes, he said the guy became very nervous and said, we have to go. We have to leave. And they both took off very fast in the same direction from which they came. So Michael's friend says to him, hey, you know, you should have got a picture of that. He's like, well, you know, maybe I still can. He's like, why don't you go up to him and ask, you know, hey, can I take a picture of you? Because I'm sort of documenting my journey on the Appalachian Trail. So Michael runs up to him and tries to catch up to him. But he runs as fast as he can, and he doesn't see them anywhere on the trail. It's as if they just disappeared, and they are nowhere to be found. And he said that's when he started to get this really bad feeling, like they encountered something that wasn't human. The story comes out of a state park in the area. There were 2 teenagers who went there late one night and pulled into this gravel like parking lot. And they're sitting in the car listening to music, hanging out. And it started to get past their curfew, so they were getting ready to leave. Well, all of a sudden, they said they seen a light coming from the woods. And they noticed it started to get brighter and brighter. And all of a sudden, they said like 4 or 5 kids walked out of the woods. And, you know, they just had sort of this weird look to them. And they walk all the way up to the car and they just stand there staring at them. And they were like, we better get out of here. Like, this is like something's not right about this. So they're trying to start the car. The car won't start. And all of a sudden, the kid in the front, he walks in front of their car and just like stands in front of the hood. So the teenager driving like yells, "You better get out of the way, I'm going to run you over." And he said all of a sudden the kid kind of stepped back slowly and then stood with the other kids again. And right then and there their car started. And as they were driving off out of the parking lot, they see them all just start pointing at them and like slowly walking towards the direction they were driving away. And it freaked them out pretty bad to the point where they did not go back to that park ever again at night.
Tonight we're going to talk about one of the creepiest phenomenons that's reported all over the world, especially here in the United States, and actually in really populated areas, and that's the dark-eyed children. Okay, if you haven't heard of the dark-eyed children before, they mostly take the form of a child, and they have soulless dark eyes. These creatures, these beings, are supposedly incredibly intimidating and menacing, even though they might present themselves as a child. People who come in contact with them report just this overwhelming fear and this overwhelming dread and just this sense that they're just like in the presence of a predator. Okay. Now the dark-eyed children mostly aren't going to just come out and attack you from people that have interacted with them or claims to have interacted with them. It seems like they always want to try to lure you out of your home, which kind of goes back to the old lores and tales of vampires about how they had to be invited in. If they can't come in, they want you to come out. Okay, some classic stories about dark-eyed children is getting a knock at your door early in the morning or late at night, and extremely pale child at the door. They mostly try to keep most of their body covered up with hoods or scarves or sunglasses, and they're going to want to invite you outside, and they're going to pretend that they need help, that there's some kind of a danger going on. Now, the other ones that people report are talking about in parking lots. Okay, they'll see like a pretty empty parking lot, kind of like a Walmart late at night, and there will be some kid that appears to be like kind of crouched down or maybe in the fetal position or kind of crying. And when somebody pulls up to help them, the kid looks up and they see those dark, soulless eyes, and then immediately they no longer look like they need help. They immediately look like they're very, very intimidating and they're after you. Okay. There's a lot of theories on this, on whether this is even a real thing, obviously, but it seems like they don't really want to like take you or hurt you. It's almost like they just want you to be afraid, and they just get that fear. And that goes back to tons of different legends about creatures called fear eaters, which present themselves in many, many different ways. If you ever want to look up a classic fear eater story that was reported massively before modern technology, look up Old Green Eyes. And it was actually during the Civil War. Tons of Civil War survivors talked about how after there'd be extremely bloody battles, they would see what a creature they would call Old Green Eyes, which was just a lurking dark shadow that seemed to crawl across the ground, and it would stay next to soldiers who had been mortally wounded, and they're terrified because they know they're about to die, and it would almost be like getting that energy from that. Dark-eyed children seem to be the same way when people talk about them. But I definitely do believe if there was something out there that wanted to like make you have your guard down, the best way to present itself is that of a child.
Have you ever heard of the black-eyed children like me? Some of us really do need your help. The problem is, you don't know which one of us do and which one of us are lying.
Let me in. Or should I say us?
You made it this far. Thank you for exploring the paranormal side of Appalachia with me. Make sure to subscribe. And as always, stay safe, stay aware, and question everything.